Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is John Harris. John is one of the founders of the TFA, that's Tennessee Firearms Association, as well as the executive director. Their website is TennesseeFirearms.com. Great website, a lot of information. You don't have to be a member to look at the site, but it's worth your time to get on there and take a look at it. John, glad to have you with us tonight. I know between your law practice and all you do with the TFA, you were swamped, so I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed it in the past and looking forward to it tonight.
Good. Well, let's get right to it. The Tennessee GOP supermajority talks a good game at election time, but they are really not pro-Second Amendment or pro-Section 26 of our Tennessee Declaration of Rights, are they?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Now, to be clear, we do have a handful of legislators that are. They're predominantly in the Republican Party. Well, these days they're almost all in the Republican Party. But with 75 Republicans in the House, there's not enough of them to make a difference, and the same is true of the Senate. There's just not enough true conservatives to actually control the direction of the caucus in the General Assembly.
Especially in the Senate. The Senate is terrible. As bad as the House is, the Senate is just. I don't think we could have one worse. I guess if the Dems controlled it, it would be worse.
Well, when your Senate leader is more interested in hearts and flames on Instagram than the Second Amendment, what are you going to say?
That's true. That's true. So much for leadership. So the opposition, and we followed this. I followed this enough to know, and I think anybody who's followed this in the state, they know that it's from the top down. It was true when Haslam was in. It's true now with Bill Lee and all of those. The Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, they're all opposed to real constitutional carry, for instance, are really most they've never supported anything the TFA has done. For the most part, as far as the leadership goes, right? So-called leadership.
That's a great point because, TFA's been around for 3 decades now. And when you look at the governor and the leadership level in the House and the Senate, that's probably true. But prior to the era of the Republican supermajority, conservatives were able to go to the rural Democrats and the conservative Republicans, particularly when they were in the minority, and put together enough votes to pass good legislation. I mean, we passed a bunch of legislation from 1995 to 2010 using a combination of Democrat and Republican sponsors in both houses. I mean, years ago, we used Doug Jackson quite a bit, Democrat senator out of Dixon, Tennessee. We used Ben West a lot. We used Eddie Bass, who used to be the sheriff down in Giles County. We used a lot of them on both sides of the aisle. And as we got the Republican supermajority, as we saw about 13 years ago now with Deborah Maggard, they became more interested in preserving their Mount Olympus, the powerhouse from which they ruled, than they were concerned about following their oath, and in particular the portion of their oath which says they're going to defend and uphold the constitutions at the state and the federal level.
And if I'm not mistaken, both Bill Haslam and Bill Lee, when they were running, I think both of them told the TFA that they would support constitutional carry. Is that accurate?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. Now, Bill Haslam said it in a chapter meeting that we have on video. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He made the promise. And then what was really funny was his team of consultants tried to backtrack it. It almost looked like Joe Biden immediately after he said it. But he said it. We've got it on video, and it's on our YouTube channel. Lee sent us a letter as he refused to answer our candidate survey back when he ran for his first term. But he sent us a letter in which he proclaimed his loyalty to the Second Amendment and his concern about the rights of citizens, and that he was going to fully restore those rights, including things as controversial as campus carry for teachers and employees of schools, and enacting constitutional carry. And yet he came into office. Actually, both of them did, and they did more damage to the Second Amendment in Tennessee, frankly, than the Democrat predecessors that had been in the governor's office.
Wow, that's saying something. But when we had a Democrat governor, probably our Republican members acted more like Republicans then. The stuff that they, not just on guns, but pick a topic, the things that they have allowed Haslam and Lee now for almost 6 years to get by with, they would have been up in arms if a Democrat was trying to push that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, take, for example, back in 2009 and 2010, when we had Phil Bredesen as governor, before Bill Haslam came on board, we were able to repeal the statute that banned carrying of handguns if you were a permit holder into restaurants that served for alcohol consumption. And even though Bredesen vetoed it, the General Assembly went back in and overrode the veto. And that was done completely with a blend of Democrats and Republicans. And one of the reasons is we've got the weakest governor in the nation because veto overrides only require a simple majority.
Yep.
But the problem now for the last 16 years is we've got a Republican supermajority that's controlled by establishment Republicans, and they think they're team players and minions of the governor as opposed to a check and a balance against the power of the administration. And so they've elevated Lee to a demigod as opposed to the administrator of the public policies that they're supposed to enact.
And they've done that across the board. I mean, it's frustrating because knowing that we don't have by design a strong governor, technically the most powerful person would be the Speaker of the House. Now, I'm not a fan of the current Speaker of the House, but technically by design, even though it doesn't name him as the most powerful one, the fact that the House of Representatives in our state government is the most powerful body. And,
yes.
And so if anything, the governor should be coming to them with hat in hand if he wants something.
Well, and that's the way it was, in that magical year when Kent Williams, as a Republican, got all the Democrats to vote for him, and then he elected himself Speaker. We still had a close enough balance that the legislature acted like the legislature, and they set public policy. And we've got a huge problem in this state when all the Coles are in the same party and they control both the office of the governor and the legislature, because then they don't operate as a check and a balance. They don't operate as if the legislature is setting public policy and the governor's job is to implement it. And you can see that, for example, in our budget. When Bill Haslam came in as governor in 2010, the state's budget under Democrat control was only $28 billion. With this small government, lower tax supermajority of Republicans and Republican governors, I think our budget this year is approaching $60 billion.
Yep.
So how do you explain that one away other than sheer incompetence and deception?
Yeah. Well, and I think when Lee took over from Haslam, it was like $38 billion, and now it's, like you say, right at $60 billion.
Right.
There's nothing conservative about these guys, nothing at all. And so we've talked about how they basically just go, the legislature seems to just want to please the governor, whether it was Haslam, whether it was Lee. But now there's other people up there. I mean, I know there's some lobbyists that oppose this. In addition to, I'm not talking about the Department of Safety, the minions that are supposed to work for us, but that Governor Lee sends in there to push back against any gun bills. But what lobbyist groups do you think are involved with the opposition as well?
Well, there's a couple up there that are not government agencies. Okay, so you've got the Moms Demand Action, which if you research them a little bit, they're basically funded by Bloomberg. They really haven't accomplished a lot other than they're there on a regular basis. and they wear a lot of red shirts with pearl necklaces. But they really haven't been that much of an impact on what has been done on Second Amendment issues. They didn't have to be because the legislature's done all the damage on its own. Then after Covenant, you've got the Covenant Moms or the Safer Tennessee groups, basically the same set of interested parties. Now they have grown quite a bit, and they play this game like a lot of gun control activists of, we really are Second Amendment supporters, but we just need reasonable gun control. Well, the Second Amendment doesn't have "but" anywhere in it, and so when they go down that path, they're clearly deviating from the Bill of Rights mandate. But aside from them, there really are two other non-government entities, and whether or not they're government entities up for debate. But there are two that, last time I checked, are classified as 501c3 charities by the IRS, and that's the Tennessee Sheriffs Association and the Chiefs of Police Association. They are very powerful anti-gun advocates in the General Assembly, and you could probably say the same thing also about the District Attorney's Conference, but I'm not sure if the DA Conference is registered as a charity or if it's some quasi-governmental entity. But these are non-elected entities operating as gun control advocates that have the ear and a lot of credibility in the General Assembly.
I thought some of those were, if they're 501c3s, I thought they couldn't lobby.
The general rule on a 501c3 from the IRS is you can't engage in any substantial lobbying activity, and to the extent you do, it has to be something relevant to your mission statement. So take the Sheriff's Association, for example. Its mission statement, the last time I checked, was to provide education and training for sheriffs because they got to be regularly certified, to provide communication and coordination between and among sheriffs, and to provide benevolent assistance to officers or their families injured in the line of duty. There's nothing in there about them being advocates for or against Second Amendment issues, DUI, jailing. None of the stuff that they get involved in is within their mission statement. And the other problem is they're a quasi, you could almost say, criminal enterprise because they file their tax returns, what's called a federal 990, and they check the box on the 990 that says they don't have a lobbyist. But they're up there with paid lobbyists, and matter of fact, a lot of the sheriffs come up on taxpayer expense. They got their uniforms on, they probably drive their patrol cars, and they're walking around, and that's all they're doing is lobbying for their issues.
So we got the law enforcers ignoring the law, and the lawmakers see it going on and don't say anything.
Well, there's a few that have. They've been challenged a couple of times, but then it's amazing which members of Republican leadership come to their defense, even in open committee hearings, rather than say, yeah, what is this? You're violating federal law by even being here. How can we tolerate this? They just pat them on the back like they're team players.
Yeah. I wish, and I don't get to be up there as much as I like, but I wish more people could get up there and see what actually goes on. Number one, our side is almost always outnumbered. I mean, sometimes Richard's the only guy up there surrounded by all the red shirt moms, all the mad moms in the red shirt. I've seen a couple of pictures there, and he's the only one there.
Yeah.
But just how they, basically what you just described, how we have people that ignore it, and we have the people that make the laws see it going on and don't say anything about it. I guarantee you if they could stop us from doing something like that, they would.
Oh, absolutely. If they could shut the doors on the true, and it doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it's Second Amendment, 10th Amendment, jury nullification, lower taxes, pick your topic. It was the same stuff back when Haslam wanted to raise the gas tax. Pick your topic. The conservatives, the grassroots groups are pushed into the zone of irrelevance by those that control the establishment, the Chamber of Commerce, those that are funded by government. it's just overwhelming, particularly when you look at the fact that the leadership and the governors are more aligned with big business and Chamber of Commerce. I mean, look at our state giving Ford $1 billion for electrical vehicle manufacturing in West Tennessee. Like Ford really needed our money, or the Titans needing a handout from the state to build a new stadium. That kind of stuff is ridiculous. But you could probably bring a Doge type entity into Tennessee and wipe out half our budget just because of the kickbacks and the feedback that they probably contain as a result of this explosive growth in our budget to begin with.
Yeah. Well, I'd say Tennessee definitely needs a Doge.
Yeah.
Definitely get my vote. Maybe we need a constitutional amendment for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the bills. Now, I've got a few bills on here, like 7 or 8 bills, and these are all from your website. And I encourage everybody to go. You can look at these more in depth, but also there's a bigger list. There's no way we can cover everything that's on the website, but these are some of the main bills that they're looking at. And so we got Senate Bill 441, House Bill 478, that reduces the strict liability in Tennessee's current posted properties law. Let's talk about that a little bit. And, what are the odds? What are the odds on any of these getting through?
This bill is one where we're trying to take the posted property statute, which came on the books in 1989, and it's strict liability. If you're authorized to carry a firearm because you got a permit or the permitless carry system, and you walk into a property that's properly posted, it's strict liability. You automatically commit a Class B misdemeanor, which is a $500 fine, which is court cost, which is potentially attorney's fees if you decide to hire one, and there's mandatory weapons forfeiture, and it's strict liability. That's an anomaly really under Tennessee law, because in most instances, trespass, which is what this really is a concept that says you're not guilty of trespass until the person asks you to come into compliance, basically leave the property.
Right.
And you refuse to do so. It's the refusal to comply that constitutes the offense. It's not true with the posted property statute. So what we tried to do with this particular bill, and we've run this topic for years now, is to say you have to ask them to leave before they can be charged, and it's the refusal to leave that constitutes the offense. I've talked with the sponsor in the House and the Senate. They think they've got problems with the bill. As simple as that concept is, it's only a paragraph, because law enforcement wants to create it. They want to reword it, but reword it in a way that effectively kills the bill. They could still pass it, but they want to convert it to an affirmative defense, which means if you violate that restriction, you would still be subject to being stopped, detained, questioned, even charged or arrested, and you would have to demonstrate to a jury that your possession of the firearm was inadvertent. So intentional possession for self-defense won't get you there. And that you left the property as soon as you were given notice to do so. Well, if that's an affirmative defense, you've still got all the hassle of attorney's fees, potentially a plea bargain, of going through the criminal justice system, being fingerprinted and photographed, that if they would just pass what we've asked, all of that would be eliminated. And it would really get down to prosecuting the people who enter the property and refuse to be compliant once it's brought to their attention.
Seems like a reasonable bill.
I think very much so on the front end, and it's just a classic example of how simple common sense request to bring us closer to the Second Amendment gets oppressed and pushed back from these, not only the leadership in the General Assembly and Lee's administration, but from these law enforcement, advocacy groups that want to keep us in the genie's bottle as opposed to letting us exercise our rights under the Second Amendment.
Okay, the next one is Senate Bill 474, House Bill 387. This is patient privacy.
Yeah, that's a bill that This one is coming from Ed Butler in the House and Janice Bowling in the Senate. And the objective with this particular bill is to deal with the problem of medical care providers, doctors, nurses, whatever, wanting to give you the third degree when you go in to get medical treatment on whether or not you've got guns in the home. And they want to talk not just to adults, they're asking these questions of juveniles.
That should be illegal right there. That's not their place.
It should be. The opposition to the bill is coming from the medical establishment, ostensibly, and I think it's deeper than that. But basically, they say, well, if you enact this and tell us we can't ask certain questions, then that's a First Amendment violation. And so the approach of this particular bill was not that it would prohibit completely asking the question, but that it would basically say, if you do ask the question, you also have to give a notice or a warning to the patient or the caregivers that the question may not be relevant to your medical care treatment. It cannot be used to deny you medical care treatment, even if you refuse to answer it. Just give them some warnings so that they can make an informed decision on whether or not to answer the question. They don't want to even do that. Now, our sponsors are good. That's what they're asking for. But they're getting a ton of pushback on this bill from other legislators and these special interest groups.
How is that a violation of the First Amendment? How is...
There's actually a case, I believe, out of Florida that they circulate because they've sent me a copy of it, where Florida, I think, had a similar bill, and the appellate court, federal appellate court down there ruled that it was.
Okay. Well, I don't want to go down this, I don't want to go way too far down this road, but normally I thought it was at least a Supreme Court opinion that we were going to treat like law, whether we should or not just an appellate court, and that's what now the law of the land. Everybody wonders why Trump has fathered, has problems.
Tennessee falls in the 6th Federal Circuit, and the opinion that they get, faced with, I think, is out of the 11th Circuit. It doesn't even apply in Tennessee. But they're throwing it around as if, hey, if you pass this law, you've invaded our First Amendment rights, and therefore it's a civil rights violation, and, the cowards that we've got in the General Assembly just bow. Whereas, a few years ago, they were more than willing to stick the federal government, poke them in the eye with the trigger law when they tried to run the abortion stuff.
Right. So we can't trust the medical community. We can't trust the professional law enforcement organizations that are lobbying. We can't trust our GOP legislators or most of them. We got a few good ones, I know that, but most of them, and we certainly can't trust our governors. This is ridiculous. Senate Bill 819, House Bill 554, Tennessee Firearms Freedom Act.
Yeah, that one is Kip Capley, and I think that's the one that Clay Doggett has tried to run a few times for us. Kerry Roberts has it in the Senate, and it is a short bill that basically says that the Second Amendment protects a civil right, and if a government official violates your Second Amendment rights, they've engaged in a civil rights violation. I think we're already there under federal law. This would make it actionable also under the Tennessee Human Rights Act.
Oh, okay. And I'm sure it's getting all kinds of pushback as well, right?
Oh, yeah. They killed it each of the years that Representative Doggett carried it, and they're pushing back on it again this year. And it's crazy because these are bills carried by Republicans. Two good Republicans have this bill, and leadership and the Lee administration are the ones pushing back on it.
When we I want to go ahead and finish covering all these bills, and then I want to come back to this thing about leadership killing Republican bills and how they go about this. It's as if those people, the reps get up there and the senators get up there, and not all of them, because some of them will stand up, but most of them, it's like, okay, you're being told that if you don't be a team player, being on the governor's team, the so-called leadership's team, that they're going to, not only is that bill not going to get through, but they don't care what your constituents think. They're basically giving you and your constituents the finger. And I don't understand why more of the legislators up there don't react to that, other than just, bow their head and go along with it.
They do. And it's unfortunate because I hear them say over and over again that they've been either threatened or intimidated, or subtle hints have been dropped that if they continue down the path, and it doesn't have to be Second Amendment, it could be
anything,
a
vouchers,
spectrum of conservative issues, that they won't get good office assignments, they won't get good committee assignments, they may lose committee chairmanship. Keep in mind, this year, for example, Senator Roberts, who used to be the Senate chair of state and local, was completely removed by Lieutenant Governor McNally, and he doesn't, even though he's got seniority, he is the chair of no Senate committees.
Do we know what's behind that?
Not real. I've got some ideas as to what might be behind it, but it's, Senator Roberts hadn't been forthcoming. I just think he doesn't want to discuss it. He just wants to take his lumps and move forward. But we saw it with Rick Womack years ago. You go over and over and over again.
Yep.
We call it woodshedding, but it's basically leadership telling these party members in their own party. I mean, we saw it with Bruce Griffey over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
That if they didn't play the team player, if they stepped out, if they pushed the issues their constituents wanted, if they didn't vote for what the governor wanted, if they didn't vote for what Sexton or McNally or William Lamberth or Jack Johnson wanted, that there would be repercussions, that their bills would die, they wouldn't get, the perks of being a legislator. I mean, in Griffey's case, they even took away his elevator pass, if you recall.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we remember. But now, I will say one good thing I think came out of that. Sexton caught a lot of hell over that. There was people across this state calling Sexton's office. And it wasn't too long. I mean, Griffey wasn't kept outside too long. Now, I think that was his last term anyway, if I'm not mistaken.
It was.
But, he didn't back down. And I think that's what more of them, just like Warner doesn't back down. I think if your constituents know, first off, you need to let your constituents know. If you're in this situation, explain to them what's going on. And, just ask the question, okay, do you want to be a yes man for the governor, a yes man for Sexton, a yes man for the perverted Lieutenant Governor McNally, or do you want me to represent you? Because here's what I'm being faced with. But if you don't say anything, if you just go along quiet and take your lumps, then okay, if you don't get anything done, they're going to think, well, this guy's a bum. He's not doing anything. We're going to vote him out. I think they should go to them every time. Every time they get threatened, I think they should do a press conference.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be tickled to death if they'd start doing that. But, unfortunately, too many of them have placed now a higher priority on their position, their rank, their office, their committee assignments than they have on the campaign promises they made. And just imagine where we would be if Trump had gone into office and broken all of his campaign promises. And just the opposite, he's going as fast as he can to fulfill as many of them. Yep,
absolutely. But it's frustrating, but more people need to know that. They need to know the dirty games that go on up there. And it's not new. This is not new to the Lee administration or the Haslam administration. I'm sure it's gone. But the bottom line is the people need to know it, because when that happens, they are, like I said, they're giving the finger not just to that rep or senator, but their district. They're saying, your district doesn't matter. This is what the governor wants. This is what McNally wants. This is what Sexton wants. You and your district don't mean anything. And that's how they should take it.
That's how they should. And along those lines, the fact that the House in particular allows committees, sometimes with 5 to 7 members on it, to kill bills essentially means they're disenfranchising most of the voters in the state, because those bill topics, I can guarantee you, things like we've already discussed tonight on the posted properties, for example, if those things got to a floor vote where it was open and transparent, they would pass.
Oh, yeah.
And what they're doing is they're killing these bills in subcommittees on technicalities or failure to have a second or, silliness like that, instead of letting these true constitutional subjects get a floor vote, because they know they can't defeat it on the floor. They know if these things were on the floor, they would pass, and they would pass not just with tight majorities, but with massive majorities. Because even the rhinos, even the establishment Republicans can't withstand voting records that are available during the next election cycle.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Everything lives or dies in committee. And you know what gets me too, and you mentioned it, not getting a second. Sometimes you don't get a motion. Now,
Yes.
and think about this, a Republican supermajority, just out of professional courtesy, you would think any and every Republican could get a motion and a second. Might not pass every committee, but that tells you too, when you know something is up, when they go in there and they can't get a motion or they can't get a second, that tells you right there, leadership did not want this thing hurt.
That's right. And they know how to communicate it, and they communicate it in those, the old legislature, most of the time, you could catch the legislators in the hallways. And now the ones that are the coals have become experts at maneuvering their ways in the back halls where they never see you. They got private elevators, they got private hallways. They can get around that building and never have to deal with their constituents.
Yep. And unfortunately, most people in the state are still focused, like most states, still focused primarily on federal issues. That's another thing that hurts us at the state level, is there's not enough people that pay attention at the state level. It's all federal, or way too much of federal, in my opinion.
Way too much, and way too much pep rally. I mean, if you attend the Reagan Day dinners, I've in the past I spoke at quite a few of them, and then amazingly I stopped getting invitations when I would stand up there and tell people, what was happening in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
And that's okay with me, because if they wanted to stand up and say, well, John's lying or John's deceiving you, then okay, let's talk about the facts. But they didn't do that. They just, stopped issuing the invitations because they didn't want the truth coming out.
Absolutely. And I've heard you tell the truth a couple of times. I've heard, as far as I know, you've always told the truth. What I meant was I've heard you at a couple of Reagan Day events, and it was good stuff. Some good red meat every time. So let's get back to the bills here a little bit. Senate Bill 824, House Bill 985, offense of possession of a weapon in a building. I think this is related to the earlier bill. Oh, no, okay, this is in a building. The other was just on property in general.
Yeah, this is a bill where we're trying to get rid of some gun-free zone issues, and this may actually be similar but a different approach to what we talked about a little bit ago about the posted properties.
Okay. And what buildings specifically are we talking? Just any building?
Well, now a lot of it is, unless we specifically target, for example, the courthouse bill, then we're targeting just the ability basically to post any property.
Okay.
And that particular one, I'm pretty sure, gets back to this criminal trespass issue of, are they required to ask you to leave before they proceed?
Okay. So one's property in general and the other's building. Okay, I got you. All right, Senate Bill 1227, House Bill 1189, enhanced and concealed firearm carry permits.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the caption is there, unless that's a bill that's trying to. Oh, yeah, that's one with Rusty Grills. That's one that I think converts it into a weapons permit or a firearms permit as opposed to a handgun permit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and we heard today that the Lee administration, through its mouthpiece, Elizabeth Stroker, who's the legislative liaison in the Department of Safety, that they oppose that idea on, quote, philosophical purposes.
Now, that's somebody who we pay their salary. Lobbying against our rights.
We were in a meeting with a legislator who's got a bill that's got this issue in it. It's not that same bill. And in that meeting, I had the opportunity to ask Elizabeth Stroker this question, right out of Bruen. Bruen says if the activity is covered by the scope of the Second Amendment, then the burden is on the government to prove that as of 1791, the nation's historical tradition had that type of regulation. And in Bruen, the court talks a lot about that phrase quite a bit, and it basically boils down to the majority of the 13 states that existed in 1791, because the court said what were doing in the territories really isn't relevant. What they were doing in individual cities, counties, or municipalities isn't really relevant. And any laws that may have come about after the fact, say in the mid 1800s, the late 1800s, the 1900s, 1968, for example,
Yeah.
that those really aren't relevant to what was permitted as part of the nation's historical tradition in 1791. And so I specifically asked Elizabeth Stroker, so which states, if you're going to oppose long arm carry by Tennesseans, which states, as of 1791, under Bruen, had that restriction? She didn't name a single one. I mean, she could have said, Kentucky, North Carolina. She could have made a list up. And it's not like this was a new issue. I mean, they've been fighting Bruen now for 3 years.
Right.
They can't give you a list of states that establish a national historical tradition to support the restrictions that they're telling the General Assembly need to stay in place.
And now this is 3 years after Bruen, and they've pretty much ignored it since then. And they always tell us if the Supreme Court says it, you got to do it. Now, as you know, I don't necessarily agree with that, but all the same, they tell us that. AG tells us that in his opinions. The lawyers that work up there tell you that, and most of the legislators. Well, but in this case, now in Oberfell, in about an hour and a half, our state folded because Bill Haslam said, you got to put out the license for the fags. All right? And so we all folded. Folded just like that. 3 years later with Bruen, and they're dragging their feet and making excuses.
Absolutely.
Pathetic.
And it's pitiful. It's pitiful that the individual, Elizabeth Stroker, who has a law degree, that's been the legislative liaison for the Department of Safety for a number of years, that claims she speaks on behalf of the governor. I mean, we've actually got her on video saying that. We sat in a meeting on an issue as clear and defined as, should we have a right to carry long arms in Tennessee? And she can't identify a single state that as of 1791 had that restriction. Not a single one.
What was her response? Okay, I can't give you a state, but what?
She didn't do that. She wanted, and her cohort from TBI wanted to quibble over what does the phrase national historical tradition mean. They wanted to quibble over how many states did that require.
Okay. So the TBI and Department of Safety. Now, you also said that the Sheriff's Association, sometimes they lobby against the gun bills as well?
Oh, yeah, for 30 years. I mean, if you roll back to 2022, on our website, we've got a video clip of Senator Mike Bell, who at the time was the chair of the Senate Judiciary just before he retired.
Right.
And they were taking up Bill Lee's permitless carry, which he either intentionally mischaracterized or ignorantly mischaracterized as constitutional carry.
Right.
Mike Bell, in that video, in live session, just lambasted law enforcement for opposing every pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment bill that's come up there during the entire time that he'd been a legislator. So, I mean, it's not like it's a recent phenomenon. These guys have done it for 3 decades.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's go to the next one here. Senate Bill 1360, House Bill 873, Civil Actions Against Arms Dealers, Manufacturers, and Sellers. This is protection for arms dealers, manufacturers, and sellers.
Right. This is a bill that is an expansion of the PLCCA, the federal act. It's actually a bill that Gun Owners of America asked the legislature to carry, and I think Fritz and Hensley have it. And basically what it says is PLCCA protects manufacturers and dealers from claims that firearms are unreasonably dangerous, okay? Just because they're firearms. And some states, and Tennessee has a PLCCA statute on the books already. The purpose of this particular bill is to close a loophole because now we've got, Beretta, Smith & Wesson, we've got Barrett, we've got a lot of other manufacturers, but not at that same level, that are in the state. And the risk is that you could go to a state, maybe like California, that doesn't have a PLCCA. It's Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. And they'll get a judgment there, but then they'll take that judgment and bring it to a state like Tennessee to try to execute on it. And what this particular bill says is that that's against our public policy. And if we declare it to be against our public policy, then the federal full faith and credit requirements are inapplicable. And so those judgments could not be enforced against assets in Tennessee.
Okay. Now, is that one getting a lot of pushback as well?
I don't think so, because it really doesn't touch on any of the
anybody actually carrying one
that the others have. Yeah.
Okay. So it's protecting the business, so they're okay with protecting the business, but they don't really want you to carry what the business sells.
That's right.
Okay. All right. SB 1407, House Bill 856 lowers the standard for the use of deadly force to protect property. And, a lot of people assume that we're in Tennessee and that if you have to protect your property and there's somebody out there trying to steal it or damage it, that you can just light them up. But that's not the case.
No, that's not the case. And we have run, Tennessee's run this bill in the past. It's been killed repeatedly. And a matter of fact, I think Texas actually has had this type of law for a long time. In Tennessee, the current law says that you can use deadly force, which includes the brandishment of a weapon, not just a firearm, but the brandishment of any weapon, a knife, a club, anything that could cause injury. That you can't use weapons that are likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, except in a circumstance where there's imminent fear of death or serious bodily injury to a human. And so, particularly after the hurricane wiped out large parts of, North Carolina and East Tennessee, we saw all these reports of looters and thieves and robbers coming in and just, taking things. And so it put a heightened focus on this issue of protection of your assets. It's not just been that, though. I mean, a few years ago, when they rioted in downtown Nashville and burned the courthouse, and a lot of businesses on Broadway were looted, same thing would have applied then. Basically, what this law says, or bill says, is if people are trespassing, trying to take your personal property, trespassing on your property, maybe trying to take your livestock, your assets, your tools and equipment of that you make a living, anything that's your stuff, that you can use non-lethal force to protect those items. But what's different about this bill is it defines non-lethal force as brandishing a weapon. So it would allow people to brandish that weapon and say, stop or I'll shoot, or drop that, tool chest and leave the property. It would allow that to happen. Whereas right now, if you protected your property by using that category of force, you typically have committed an aggravated assault where the penalties are much higher than they are for the person that's stealing the stuff.
On your own property.
On your own property, yeah.
So is this one, you think, maybe have a little better chance this year?
No, TBI said today in that meeting that we were in that they strongly opposed that change in the law. Now, why TBI would oppose it, I don't know. But my suspicion is if TBI is against it, then so is Elizabeth Stroker, who's the spokesperson for the Department of Safety, and other government entities are against it as well.
Yeah. But this is Tennessee, right? And this is America, right?
Well, that's what the map says, but you're wondering if just like Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico, if the state government and some of these law enforcement agencies aren't redefining the state of Tennessee to be, their fiefdom and do what they want, and we're just the peasants and the serfs living within the boundaries.
Yeah, we're in Leesville. Yeah, and
Leesville.
we're in Leesville, and it sucks.
Yeah.
All right, HJR 53, constitutional amendment.
Yeah, this bill ran last year. It's a good bill. This is the problem in Tennessee is we've got a state constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 26, that purports to allow the government, the state of Tennessee, to regulate the wearing of arms with a view towards crime prevention. That's the particular phrase that was added in 1870. After the U.S. Supreme Court decided the McDonald case in 2010, the Second Amendment now applies to all states. And so you can't have a state constitutional provision that pretends to grant the government more regulatory authority than the shall not be infringed standard in the Second Amendment would allow. So House Joint Resolution 53 would amend the state constitution to bring it into conformity with the language of the Second Amendment. Now, this passed the Senate last year on an overwhelming majority, but the leadership in the House, predominantly Cameron Sexton, is what we understand, didn't want it going forward in the House. And had it gone forward in the House, it likely would have passed on the floor. And had it done that, it would have had to have passed in this session, but it would have been on the ballot for the people to decide whether or not to amend the Constitution in 2026, because you can only run constitutional amendments in a year in which you've got a gubernatorial election. Yeah. And a constitutional amendment's got to come through the General Assembly twice in order to get on the ballot. So now that Cameron Sexton or his henchmen killed it last year, we've started over, and the soonest that this could potentially be up for a public vote is the year 2030. Now, can you imagine that? A U.S. Supreme Court decision says part of our Constitution violates the Second Amendment under the McDonald decision. We try to clean it up so that there's no confusion about the authority of the state government. And lo and behold, those in control of state government are blocking the amendment.
And you said it passed unanimously in the Senate. Why do I think that they knew what the House was going to do? That's just
because
I can't prove that, but that's just what I suspect.
If you look back over the last 30 years, and particularly the last 16 of Republican supermajority control, there seems to be a pattern where they trade off on different bills in different years. It'll pass in one house and then fail in the other. And then it'll pass the next year where it failed, and then it's just a flip-flop. And what they accomplish is a couple of things by that. One is they falsify their voting records, so that when it's an election cycle, they say, well, I voted for it, but the House killed it or the Senate killed it, but I still voted for it or I sponsored it. But I think they know, just like you said, that it's like they get together and they plan out, okay, this year you kill these bills and we'll kill those bills. And then they flip the cards and shuffle the deck again to make it difficult for us as citizens to keep track of what they're doing. But the net result is they kill almost everything.
Everything good, anyway.
Yeah.
So for a complete list of bills, this was just some of the bills. If you're out there in the audience, if you're not familiar with Tennessee Firearms Association, you go to TennesseeFirearms.com. You can not only look over these bills in more detail, but there's a list of a lot of other bills that the TFA is either sponsoring, opposing, or in some cases just watching. Yeah, and it's on our website as well. Now, March 26th, that's this Wednesday, is going to be TFA Day on the Hill. Go to TennesseeFirearms.com, and there's a sign-up link there. And this is going to be this is once a year we have TFA, and I think every year we do it, John, don't we? We partner with Gun Owners of America.
We do. The first year or two that we did it, we did not have that partnership. But for the last, 4 or 5 years, we've partnered with Gun Owners of America. Oddly enough, we've never partnered with the NRA on this stuff.
Well, sometimes they're just not reliable allies. So sometimes you can't partner with him.
Well, that or they're the National Republican Assembly.
Yeah. Now the 26th. It's interesting. It ended up on the 26th because earlier in the session, I think on the House side, and this is actually, you can read this on the website. Was it Lowell Russell that shifted all of the gun bills to the 26th?
Yeah, I don't think he was aware that that was our lobby day. I think he was just pushing stuff to what is or maybe the last docket in that subcommittee.
Right.
And Lowell Russell has a history of chairing the Civil Practices Subcommittee of the House Judiciary. But there's also this amazing coincidence that a lot of the bills that we're interested in that come through that committee die in that committee.
For years.
For years.
Yeah. And we have a John Rich event. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and the link is on the site.
Yeah, here's, as we've talked a little bit, you might notice the pattern of failure in the General Assembly to do what Bruen calls for that we've been discussing. And so in the last 5 years in particular, TFA and then its new sister entity, Tennessee Firearms Foundation, which is a charity, have taken up engaging in litigation at the local, state, and federal level to try to get court orders on a variety of issues that deal with Second Amendment topics. A lot of our litigation has been against the ATF, but we've got lawsuits pending against Bill Lee, Jonathan Scometti, and the city of Memphis right now. And the John Rich event is for the charity fundraiser to help us raise money to continue to pursue the litigation effort. And if you look on the website, you'll see that, in fact, most of the litigation effort that we've had over the last 5 years has actually been filing amicus briefs in the U.S. Supreme Court, and we do almost all of that in conjunction with GOA.
Okay.
But it'll be a Thursday night fundraiser. John Rich and his band are going to perform. It's at his home. It's a very limited ticket availability, and we're about 60% sold out already on that.
Wow.
And if you'd be interested in tickets, like I said, they're $1,000 a piece, but that's driven in part by the fact that it's at his home and it's an expensive venue to rent, and we've got a very limited number of tickets that we can sell.
Yeah. And if you're interested, you can email John Harris at TennesseeFirearms.com or Christy Frizzell at TennesseeFirearms.com regarding tickets, and that's also on the website. Before we get to your closing thoughts, and we're talking about a fundraiser here, and I meant to mention this at the beginning of the show before we started. This is totally unrelated, but we did have somebody make a very, very nice donation to Tennessee Informer, and they don't want to be named. You know who you are out there, but we do appreciate it. You definitely helped us out, and we thank you for that, and we appreciate it. And we're going to have you back on again in the not too distant future, but I'm still not going to say who you are because you don't want us to name you, and I understand that. So, well, John, any closing thoughts?
I think this has been a great opportunity to get to talk to your listeners about some of the stuff that's going on right now. But even if they got sort of confused by all the different bills we were talking about, what they've got to understand, what's critical for them to understand is that, like with the red flag down special session 2 years ago, their voices are critical. If this supermajority, if our governor and his minions in the General Assembly continue to think and assume from the silence of the constituents that they're doing what the people of Tennessee want, they're going to continue to abuse our rights wholesale without care for what the Second Amendment or the Supreme Court says. And it's critical that your listeners get involved and get engaged. And we try to make that easy through the Tennessee Firearms Association's website because all the information that we provide is free and no cost. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to chip in. We want you to, but it's more like going to church. We want you to get the message and be a believer. And then if you want to support it, come back and support it. But the most important thing is to help you understand the lay of the land and to help you better communicate with your elected officials And we do that through the email system that's free. And we do that through the letter writing advocacy tool, which is what you took that list of bills off of earlier, uh, so that you can just click on a topic that's of interest to you and send emails to your legislators telling them how you feel and what you want them to do about those issues.
Absolutely. Well, and I will do want to reiterate, that is a great website, guys. If you haven't been on it, definitely go on it. You get all the information you need, and you also have a link for podcasts on there. Richard Archie does a lot of podcasts that are linked on there. I think you do some as well, don't you?
I've done some. We've sort of been transitioning from podcast to YouTube shorts and reels and video topics. So we're sort of weighing out how to be most effective with the time we have, because what your listeners also probably may need to know is that, and I know you know it, is that Richard Archie and myself and our chapter leaders, and you're one of those, we're all volunteers. So, I spend roughly 20 hours a week or more donating time to TFA. Richard spends that much, if not more, doing the same thing, and we're all grassroots. It's not like TFA is raising money to pay us LaPierre style salaries. It's all done on the because we want to make a difference, not because we want to make a paycheck.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, this is definitely not NRA type organization by any means. Well, hey, thanks for coming on, and thanks for all you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You have a good night.
Thank you.
I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell, to make sure you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com. Please find and follow us on Facebook as well as on X. Now for some announcements. Maury County GOP presents an evening with author and speaker Rod Dreyer discussing his new book Live Not By Lies. This is 27 March, 6 to 8 p.m., Maury County Memorial Building, 308 West 7th Street, Columbia, Tennessee. Go to murraytngo.com for tickets online. Tickets are $20, also available at the door while seats are available. His book, Live Not By Lies, is a manual for Christian dissidents and builds on his concerns about the decline of Western civilization, particularly from a cultural and religious perspective. He will discuss Western society slowly becoming totalitarian in nature and how Christians are being pressured to conform to ideologies in direct opposition to their faith. He argues that the rise of political correctness, cancel culture, and social justice movements create an environment where dissenting voices, particularly those of religious conservatives, are silenced or persecuted. He explores tactics that Christian dissidents can use to navigate and resist the pressures by drawing on historical parallels between experiences of people living under Soviet communism and those living in the contemporary West. He touches on the importance of preparing spiritually, mentally, and emotionally for the challenges that may lie ahead, particularly for those who hold traditional Christian views on issues like marriage, gender, and sexuality. Live Not By Lies is a call to action for Christians to stand firm in their faith and live authentically. And we have another event to announce, and this has to do with the Tennessee Constitution. And if you want to learn the Tennessee Constitution, Jeff Cobble, constitutional attorney, will be at the Peachtree Learning Center Saturday, April 12th, 1 to 6 p.m., and that's 100 North Main Street in Sparta, Tennessee. It's an old church that's been converted. Donations appreciated. To reserve a seat, call 931-316-9639. Before we get to discussing our guests next week, I just want to say a few things. This situation that we're experiencing in our country between President Trump and the judges, these rogue judges, this is a creation of all these decades of this idea of judicial supremacy and this idea that the Supreme Court, no matter what the issue, is the final arbiter. The president has a role as well in their government, as does Congress. We have three separate branches. We don't have three equal branches, okay? I want you to think about something. Everybody likes to say that the court's the final arbiter, and we have operated that way, especially in the last decades. But remember, the court has taken a lot of power for itself over the years, and nobody's put them in check. The Congress hasn't put them in check. Now, some people may say, well, the Congress can't do anything. No. Go read the Constitution. Look in Article 3, Section 2. That talks about the judiciary. A couple things to remember here. The Supreme Court has its original jurisdiction spelled out in the Constitution, okay? It has its appellate jurisdiction spelled out in the Constitution. But in that same paragraph, it also says that in reference to appellate jurisdiction, and this goes for the Supreme Court, it therefore goes for all the federal courts, all the lower federal courts, which, oh, by the way, the Constitution didn't create the lower federal courts. It authorized the Congress to create the lower federal courts. Okay, they created them. And when it says judicial power, the Congress decides the powers that the courts have. And this whole thing about these injunctions being issued, hey, Congress can rein these lower federal judges in. It's a matter of will. It's fine and well if they impeach them, but we know it's a high bar to get somebody impeached and removed. You just have to pass legislation to restrict their appellate jurisdiction. You have to pass you can pass legislation to just make certain things completely off limits to them. You could you could take away their authority, the Congress could, to issue injunctions to the president or whatever you want to. The Congress has this power. They've used it in the past. They need to use it again. Impeachment's fine and well, but that's a very high bar. So don't let them just push impeachment and not push reform. They have the authority. They have the responsibility. They've done it in the past. They've done it as recently as the early 2000s. They restricted the Supreme Court as well as the other lower federal courts on their appellate jurisdiction. They can't limit their original jurisdiction, but they can totally limit their appellate jurisdiction. They can get rid of whole districts if they want. If they want to dissolve a federal district, they could. If they wanted to say, hey, you know what? You guys are not going to meet again for ever how long, they could. Doubt me? Go look up and read about our early history. Look at what the Jefferson administration did when they took over from the Adams administration. And this was right after, in the time frame of the Marbury versus Madison case. Another thing, and I didn't know this, I actually heard this on the radio on the way here. And I knew that we had, over the years, I think there's been like 15 federal judges, to include Supreme Court justices, that have been impeached. 8 have actually been removed. The first one, Thomas Pickering, was actually removed because of a decision he made, a court decision, where he did not follow the Constitution. He blatantly did not follow the Constitution. And the House impeached him and the Senate removed him. So when Trump says, look into impeaching that judge, that's something obviously Congress has to do. But it can be done. And we understand, of course, Roberts got all upset about it. I think most of us would like to see Roberts gone ever since his Obamacare decision. I'm sure a lot of us would like to have seen him impeached and removed. The Congress is the key on this. They can fix the courts. And by fix them, I mean make them adhere to the Constitution. I mean restrict their appellate jurisdiction. They have the authority to do that. Now, having said that, since that is in the Constitution, that they have the authority to limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and lower federal courts. They can do away with federal courts. They don't have to have any of these. That being said, does it make any sense to you, this claim that we're always told that Supreme Court's the final arbiter? Why would the founders in the Constitution make the Supreme Court the final arbiter, if that was their intent, to make them the final arbiter, if they were going to give Congress the authority to limit their jurisdiction? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Because guess what? They're not the final arbiter. People are the final arbiter, and that's more than just voting. The president has a role, the Congress has a role. The Congress has the most power. They need to get off their butt and use it. They have liked the fact that the court in a lot of cases has, you could say, taken the blame on things or has been the scapegoat. They can say, well, hey, it's not us, it's the court. But no, they have the power, they have the responsibility to do it. We have to start insisting that they do it. Now, the court has a legitimate role, but remember, the court really only has an opinion. The executive has the sword. The Congress has the purse. The court has opinion. If their opinion is illegitimate and blatantly unconstitutional, like so many things they have decided over the years, it's up to the executive not to enforce that unconstitutional opinion. It's up to the Congress not to give any financial support to that. And if they think that guy is, rather than maybe just wrong, if they think it's a blatantly unconstitutional opinion, then the Congress can impeach him or her. So we've believed a lie for a long time. This is an older lie than the JFK stories we've been told. All right? We need to make Congress step up. Sure, if they can impeach them and remove some of these judges, great. The main thing we need them to do is use their congressional authority given to them by the Constitution to limit the appellate jurisdiction of the courts. That's all on that for tonight. So, next week, our guest will be attorney, author, and constitutional expert Joe Wolverton with the John Birch Society, here to discuss how to make America states again. Hope you'll join us again. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.